Hello, my name's Dr. Alex Blower, a research fellow at Arts University Bournemouth and founder of a national network of educators called Boys Impact. It's my absolute pleasure to spend the next few minutes talking to you a little bit about some of the work that we do, why it's important that we do that work, and what the exciting possibilities are for the future. But before we get started, a little bit more about me. So I've been working in research and education for about the last 15 years, mainly focusing on socioeconomic inequality and masculinity. I've spoken at government events in Westminster, and over the last 3 years we have built a significant network of educators right across the UK. We do a lot of research surrounding issues that are related to inequality and masculinity, specifically those gaps in educational attainment, and a lot more besides. Now, if we look at what's been going on about inequality and masculinity in education for about the last 2 decades, then what we've seen in policy is an articulation and a re-articulation and a re-articulation of the issue, whether it be government reports, whether it be organisations like the Higher Education Policy Institute, or more recently organisations like the Centre for Social Justice. We've seen lots of noise around this issue for a long time, but what it hasn't done is translated into any meaningful activity taking place on the ground. Now, if we look at higher education participation statistics, we see that in the year 2021-22, if you were a young man and you were eligible for free school meals, then about 13% of that population would progress onto higher education. If you were a white and black Caribbean young man, then the percentage was about 18%. So again, really low. Now, it's worth noting that the main driver behind this is socioeconomic inequality. If you are a young woman who is eligible for free school meals, then those HE participation rates are still painfully low. It's just from my place and my experiences with Boys Impact, then I focus specifically on that intersection between masculinity and socioeconomic inequality. For those students that weren't eligible for free school meals, the higher education participation rate pretty much doubles. Now, if we're going to look at Key Stage 4 outcomes and attainment, then in the year 2023-24, about 24% of young men who were eligible for free school meals were getting a 9 to 5 in GCSE Maths and English, which, as we know, really hampers the chances of future educational progression and those opportunities. So arguably, after GCSEs, 75% of those young men are being ruled out of even the chance structurally to apply for those level 3 courses or get onto the academic pathways that might eventually be more likely to lead in towards higher education. Now, that's the education side of things, okay? But there's another big side to this, and why we should care about the work that's to do with masculinity and educational inequality. And that is more and more to do with where boys and young men are learning what it means to be a successful man. What does it mean in 2025 to be worthwhile as a man, to be valued as a man, to have a legitimate masculine identity? Because we're in a place where over the last 20 years, the world has changed significantly. We've made massive strides forwards with gender equity and equality. We've still got a long way to go, but we're in a far better place than we were 20 years ago. We're also in a stage where the whole concept surrounding what gender means is being discussed and debated in a way that it never had been before. If we look at the gender fluidity, trans identity, then it's a period of significant change. And what does that change mean for a young man who's a teenager, going through puberty, not sure of his place in the world? It means that it can be quite isolating, quite confusing, lots of mixed messages perhaps surrounding what constitutes the type of behaviour that he should be doing. But where easy answers to some of those things might lie at the young men's fingertips are online and social media engagement. I'm sure all of you, or many of you who are watching this video, saw Adolescence, the Netflix drama. And whilst it was a drama, not documentary, not fact, what it did do was point towards some significant challenges that are going on with our young men. The manosphere is a growing kind of confederacy of interest groups that are all loosely aligned into the manosphere. If you're interested, Ofcom recently did some research where they categorised some of these manosphere content and content creators. And it tends to feature influencers such as Andrew Tate. Not necessarily that the young men will be watching Andrew Tate. That was very much kind of 2021's news. There's a whole new raft now for you to get your head around and keep up with. But it is those influencers that perpetuate this insecurity surrounding what it means to be a man. And they'll exploit very real afflictions that young men are experiencing at the moment and use it as fuel for their ideological position. So use it as fuel for this idea that women have somehow pushed them out and men need to reclaim the manliness. And what we find structurally in technology going on as well is that a lot of these algorithms amplify misogynist or anti-feminist sentiment on social media and online. And it means that if you're a young man, You just need to be there for this stuff to find you. You don't need to go searching for it. You don't need to like things. The fact that you are a 15-year-old boy and you're on TikTok means that the algorithm will find you and start pumping this content towards you. There are good reasons why young men tend to engage with that type of content. Good reasons why it's got that allure, that sense of appeal, because like we say, it's capitalising on very real afflictions, right? And there's been I'll put it up there actually so you can see it. There's been a brilliant piece of research conducted recently by academics that have characterised how young people get further and further in, young men especially, into manosphere content. And what they show right at the very top of this funnel, where it's broadest, is that it comes from a sense of interpersonal and social rejection. These young men feeling outsiders, isolated, quite unsure of what they are expected to do in situations and how to do it, quite a lot of pressure on the way that they look, not just their identities in the classroom now, but increasingly their digital identities as well, and what they're pushing out into the world online. And it is that sense of rejection and insecurity that provide the hooks for the manosphere content to start drawing them in. Now, when we're talking about the work as well, it's important to highlight that this isn't a zero-sum game, okay? The way that we are positioning our work with young men isn't to put resources towards young men and take them away from young women at all, quite the opposite. In fact, there is a quote by an academic writer called J.J. Bowler from a book called Mask Off, Masculinity Redefined, which I absolutely love. And what J.J. Bowler says in the book is, because society is generally patriarchal, it's a kind of double-edged sword, a poisonous panacea. That is to say that it's the same system that puts men at an advantage in society. It's the same one that limits them, inhibits their growth, and eventually leads to their breakdown. Now, what J.J. Bowler is saying there is, if we think about these patriarchal societal systems and structures that we've got in our society that we've created for ourselves, then it's created a double-edged sword. On one side of that sharp sword, we see significant gender-based harms and ills related to violence against women and girls, domestic violence, sexual assault, gender pay gaps, which are absolutely horrendous. And then on the other sharp edge of the other side, we see the way that it affects men. And we see gaps in educational attainment. We see increased rates of homelessness and addiction. We see increased rates of entry into the criminal justice system. And we see increased rates of death by suicide. This isn't either or. These two things are happening because of those same societal systems and structures. So through the work with Boys Impact and the targeted work that we do engaging with young men is to create a situation where they can expect to be happy, healthy men in fulfilling employment, capable of fantastic relationships, whether that be romantic or being a great dad to their children. And by working with young men to achieve those things, then we're contributing towards blunting on one side of the sword, which in turn will lead to a situation where there are fewer adult men with significant mental health challenges, who are on the wrong side of the law, who are more likely, due to all of these circumstances, to perpetrate those gender-based ills that we spoke about. So the work of Boys Impact surrounds itself within that conceptual approach, and it's really, really important that we highlight that. The work is done in alignment with a set of principles called the Taking Boys Seriously principles. Now, these were developed by Ulster University in Northern Ireland, and they've been researching for about 20 years. They use an approach called a relational educational approach with their 10 principles that they argue, if used intentionally in education, can make a significant difference on the lives and experiences and educational outcomes of young men. They did research with about 1,000 young men over this 20 years, and what they found from the young men is they spoke incredibly highly of educators who understood their point of view, appreciated the issues that they might have faced outside of school, connected to them and listened to their point of view, challenged them, but in a supportive way, and 85% of them agreed that they are more likely to learn if they feel like their voice is valued in an educational setting. Now, when it came to why we started this, then it goes back to a project that we ran with Arts University Bournemouth and a creative writing, photography extravaganza that we did with the young men, a lot of whom who had been excluded from mainstream education. And what happened, especially in the creative writing workshop, was magic. We constructed it as a listening exercise, so a way for these young men's voices to be heard. And in the latter part of the day, then one of the young men in particular wrote a poem called I Come From, and I'll just read it out to you now. I come from a small house on a busy road. I come from constant arguing. I come from memories with my family. I come from not enough sleep. I come from not being able to stay calm. I come from doing stupid stuff with people who I thought were my mates. I come from breaking things. I come from overcoming my fears. I come from learning not to judge others till I walk in their shoes. I come from. What we created in these workshops was this safety for these young men to actually speak their truth, to be real with each other and tell us what it was like to be them. And it was amazing, but it was a flash in the pan. When we followed up with interviews in the alternative provision and spoke to the young men, and we said, brilliant, like, you've had this amazing time on this project, but what have you learned? What do you want to take forward? And they said, well, nothing, because if I did, then I'd get beaten up here, so I'm not going to do it. We knew we had a challenge, and that challenge was the day-to-day educational experience. It wasn't enough just to do a flash in the pan kind of one-off, creative, amazing day, because that paled in comparison to what these young men were experiencing in education every day. So we worked down south, firstly, to establish Dorset Boys Impact Hub with a school called Fylde Upper School. And what we found after 12 months of embedding some of these Taking Boys Seriously principles across the school was that their gaps in attainment between free school meals, boys and girls, began to close. We saw a decreasing of the number of young men that were being removed from the classroom for behaviour events, decrease of the number of young men being internally or permanently excluded and suspension as well. And it was incredible, but we didn't know if it was a one-off, right? So what we had to do was then test it out. So we went out to every school across Dorset that we could get in at, and in November 2023, we had our first meeting of Dorset Boys Impact Hub. There was 9 schools there at the time. Dorset Boys Impact Hub is now up to about 40 different schools that are all committed to piloting an evidence-based approach with regards to the work that we do. Nationally, Boys Impact has grown into a UK-wide movement. So we've got 15 regional impact hubs now. There's one up in Lincolnshire. We hold conferences every year nationally, and we do a lot of work in the policy space as well. We've just finished a pilot with United Learning, which was across 16 schools in 5 different geographic regions of England, and the findings from that pilot show really strong signs of early promise. We've seen improvements in attendance, we've seen improvements in behaviour and relationships and belonging with the young men involved, and we're looking to scale that pilot significantly for the forthcoming academic year. It's still very early days for Boys Impact. We are a very new organisation in the grand scheme of things. But we're committed to taking the strategic approach to build this evidence base, to challenge those deficit-driven discourses and assumptions, and hopefully leave the world for young working class men a better place as a result. So last thing, I'll just read out to you a little bit about Boys Impact. Boys Impact is a movement. We are dedicated to addressing the gap in educational outcomes for boys and young men who receive free school meals. As a network of educators, researchers and practitioners, our approach is strengths-based and evidence-led. Boys Impact exists to create ecosystems in research, policy and practice which enable boys and young men who experience socioeconomic inequality to flourish.